legislative session happening on Thursday, but tomorrow we'll kick off first with the CPPCC, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Committee. That is a political advisory body made up of people from different minor political groups, from different religious groups, ethnic minorities. It's a mechanism to show broad representation from different segments of the population. And they will be listening to the speech from Chairman Wang Huning, who will talk about their work over the past year. Key themes usually would focus around unity under the Chinese Communist Party, the one country, two systems model, the importance of Taiwan and Hong Kong and Macau as part of the country. And these delegates will then also sit in for the next day's session at the NPC, the National People's Congress. That is the far more important session where Premier Li Qiang will be presenting the government work report, which will outline the achievements over the past year as well as the economic targets for the year ahead. And this year particularly is also very important because the Chinese government will be unveiling the 15th five-year plan, and the 3,000 or so delegates will be reviewing that, debating that, and they will likely approve the final version by the end of the two sessions.
What about the economic indicators we're watching for?
So when it comes to the economic indicators for 2026, we'll be looking out for, of course, the headline numbers, the GDP number for the year expected to be around 4.5% to 5%, which will be slower than the around 5% that has been set as the target last year. So that shows you that the Chinese government will likely be more tolerant of a slower growth in exchange for higher quality growth. This is based on what economists have been estimating, based on what Chinese state media has been saying, and based on the provincial targets set by the various provinces in China ahead of the two sessions. We're also looking out for the inflation target expected to stay at 2%. Bear in mind, we are hovering at just above 0% when it comes to CPI, so still a long way to go there. We'll also look out for the budget, the fiscal budget target and the deficit target. The headline deficit expected to be at 4%, which is the same as last year. That's the narrow deficit. But if you look at the broader deficit, including the bond quota, those are expected to be ramped up. Morgan Stanley, for example, expecting the ultra-long special sovereign bonds to be ramped up from 1.3 to 1.5 trillion yuan. That would give the central government more fiscal power to pump into things like consumption subsidies and to boost the economy. And similarly, local government special bonds also expected to be ramped up from the 4.4 trillion yuan last year to somewhere between 4.6 to 5 trillion yuan this year.
Min, thank you. Bloomberg China correspondent Min Lo. Now on to some other global headlines we're following. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi calling on Iran to pay attention to the reasonable concerns of its neighbors. That's after Tehran's retaliation against U.S. and Israeli attacks included strikes on Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. The ministry says Wang spoke by phone with his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi, reaffirming China's support for Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The U.S. Navy says China has dramatically increased submarine production and may soon field a new vessel capable of striking large portions of the U.S. with nuclear missiles. The Navy intelligence chief says two next-generation Chinese submarines are expected to enter service from later this decade. The Pentagon's own shipbuilding efforts have been hampered by workforce and labor issues. Russia and Ukraine still expect planned U.S.-led peace talks to go ahead this week, despite the U.S. military campaign against Iran. But a source in Moscow says the meeting is unlikely to happen in Abu Dhabi, with Turkey or Switzerland among possible alternatives. This would be the fourth meeting between the sides this year, as the U.S. seeks to broker a deal to end Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Heidi.
And April, as with these geopolitical conflicts that impact global energy markets, we have seen a pretty obvious split in the fortunes of oil importers, net that is, and oil exporters. And the former category is India. And you've seen some of the recent stock gains that we've seen as a result of the US trade deal being clinched, essentially being a race. The escalating conflict between the US and Iran sparking that broad risk-off move. We've seen emerging markets more broadly, assets, including currencies, come under quite a bit of pressure, and that has included the rupee as well as Indian equities. Of course, India depends on oil imports for a majority of its energy needs. Well, the Prime Ministers of Canada and India have pledged to boost cooperation in trade and supply chains as the two nations look to reset relations.
This is not merely the renewal of a relationship. It is the expansion of a valued partnership with new ambition, focus, and foresight. A partnership between two confident countries charting our own course for the future.
Our Asia-Pacific economy reporter Swati Pandey joins us now for more. And it's interesting. It's almost a strange time to be having bread and butter conversations about bilateral relationships when everything else is in a flux. But what does this tell us about that relationship now?
Yes, that's absolutely right. This trip has been overshadowed by the Iran attack. India and Canada's relationship had hit a low point under Justin Trudeau in 2023 when his government had accused India of assassinating a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. They had expelled diplomats of countries, each other's countries, and visa services had stopped. So that was a low point. And then Carney came into office last year. And since then, there has been a cautious rebuild of that relationship. Carney's visit is the first Canadian Prime Minister visiting India in almost 8 years. So that really goes to show the importance of rebuilding that trade tie and resetting that relationship. They have signed a trade deal. They want to sign a trade deal agreement later this year, which would double the trade, the bilateral trade between the two countries to about $50 billion by 2030. That is still a very small amount, but it would be doubling from current levels. They are talking about shipping uranium into India for nuclear energy generation. There is talk about expanding trade ties for critical minerals, for energy, education. So it's kind of really broad-based discussion that happened between the two leaders.
So with these discussions, Swati, what was ultimately achieved? How would you rate the way in which Carney's visit to India went overall, and given what was already on the agenda?
I thought it was interesting that they did not discuss the assassination, this whole India's involvement, alleged involvement was not discussed at all. And I was going through some local media reports in Canada where it looked like the Sikhs in Canada were quite displeased by Carney not addressing that issue and just focusing on trade. In terms of trade, yes, a lot has been achieved. Like I mentioned, they signed some deals around uranium supply, and they've spoken about expanding that trade relationship and doubling bilateral trade between the two countries by 2030. So it does look like they are on a stronger footing, which is obviously good in a world where politics is really fraught and trade ties have come under a lot of scrutiny with Donald Trump putting tariffs on a whole bunch of countries around the world.
Carney's arriving in Australia today. What are we expecting here?
Yeah, he should be in Sydney very soon. I'm not sure there is anything on the agenda for today, so really things get going from tomorrow. He is doing a fireside chat at the Lowy Institute tomorrow night. He's meeting with Australian pension funds and business leaders in Sydney, and then he heads off to Canberra, where he has the rare honour of speaking in Parliament. If I'm not mistaken, it will probably be the first Canadian Prime Minister in about 20 years to do that. And it is believed that his comments will likely echo the remarks he made at the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland, where he talked about the middle powers banding together against the economic coercion of the big guys, which was interpreted as remarks against Donald Trump's global coercion. So that's going to be on Thursday, and then he heads off to Japan to meet Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi there.
Bloomberg's Swati Panti there. Coming up on the Asia trade, we'll take a look at how the Iran war could impact foreign policy across this region. ANU National Security College joins us for Australia Ahead next. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Burr.
I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Christina Ruffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas.
The sector is really propelling this deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors. We got a big week coming up in politics.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance. Bloomberg is covering all things crypto, the people, the transactions, and the technology. Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays only on Bloomberg.
Australia always supports diplomatic action where possible, and we hope that the actions that have been taken lead to a swift resolution. And we also say that very clearly the consequences of this are that we are concerned about the regional escalation.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese there speaking about the conflict in the Middle East, and Albanese says Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei will not be mourned and that Tehran was behind two attacks on Australian soil in 2024 targeting the Jewish community. And of course, US involvement in a potentially prolonged conflict in the Middle East also has implications for Australia and the Asia Pacific. Joining us now is Jennifer Parker, who's adjunct fellow at the Australian National University's National Security College. She previously served for more than 20 years with the Royal Australian Navy and has had extensive operational experience in the Middle East. Jennifer, always great to talk with you. Appreciate your time. Let me start off with that angle in terms of the implications for security in our own backyard. We've seen with previous periods of US distraction and being tied up with elongated conflicts in the Middle East, that's come at the ability of China to be able to build up its operations and influence in the Asia Pacific. Is that a risk now?
Look, it's certainly a risk. It's always a risk when the US is distracted away from the Indo-Pacific and away from competing with China. What does that mean? And, we did see, and most analysts would recognise that the decades-long wars in the Middle East through the early part of this century did allow China to gain ground, reclaim and militarise islands in the South China Sea and invariably have a degree of military control now. I guess the question is how long this conflict goes for. Clearly, it is very much not the short, sharp strikes of June 2025. Trump is saying 4 or 5 weeks. I don't think you can read into that too much. I don't think this is a years-long conflict. We're not going to see the US put boots on the ground. We did see the Secretary of Defence, Pete Hegseth, talk about the fact that the aim is not to rebuild a society in Iran. So I think it is not the same as Iraq and Afghanistan, where some commentators have compared it to. If, though, it allows the US to reduce the instability in the region to a point where they don't have to keep pulling assets from the Indo-Pacific and sending them to the Middle East, that could actually have a positive impact on the Indo-Pacific, which means the US can actually focus more on dealing with the military threats in the Indo-Pacific, which is beneficial, of course, for Australia's security.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting. There's two very polar opposite results that we could get there, right? Is the reality more likely that we'll get something in the middle? Because it feels like we are a long way from true regime change, and so much of that depends on really the willingness of President Trump and the administration to do, as he says, whatever it takes. Do you think that means ground troops?
No, I don't think it means ground troops. In fact, I don't think that regime change is the key objective of the US here. I think that President Trump was a little loose with his words over the weekend. Certainly his address in the last 24 hours seemed much more scripted, and he was clear. They had four main military objectives. One is to take out the ballistic missile capability of Iran. Two is to set back the nuclear program. 3, to take out their Navy, and 4, to impact their proxies. I think the US is really trying to get tight on their messaging now and really articulate those military objectives. I think regime change is something they would like to have. Clearly, they've hit a range of political targets, but I don't think they're staking military success on that. They're staking military success on setting back Iran in those military capabilities and reducing instability in the region in that way.
Jennifer, do we rule out a role from Australia in this Middle East conflict? I mean, we're seeing the UK opening up its bases, albeit rather reluctantly.
Yeah, look, I don't think there is a role for Australia here, but I think this is a really good question because, to be honest, Australia has been involved in many conflicts in the Middle East, supporting the US. I think this is a little bit different. Firstly, because I do not see the US putting ground troops into Iran in any way at this stage based on their current military objectives. So we wouldn't be asked to commit to that. 2, previously when Australia has joined the US in support of these things, the US has put a lot of groundwork into trying to develop a coalition, wanting that political international support before they strike. They haven't done this time. They were very happy to strike alongside Israel and not include partners in that conversation. So I think there'll be less political pressure for any kind of commitment to Australia. Of course, Australia has a very capable Australian Defence Force, but the US doesn't need Australian capabilities to prosecute this campaign. They clearly don't think they need the political support of having more flags on the operation. So in this specific instance, I don't think it's likely.
Are we expecting, I mean, to your point, maybe we don't see a swift resolution and this could drag on for a couple of weeks. What else are the risks as far as Australia is concerned?
Look, there are a range of them. We talked about, whether this becomes prolonged and becomes another US distraction or not. I think it probably won't, but it's hard to say right now. Of course, when it comes to Australia, we've been such a lucky country that we've not really focused on resilience and preparedness. We've talked about it since we said there was no such thing as strategic warning time, but we haven't done anything about it. Of course, there's a huge topic of conversation right now about Australia's fuel dependency. We import 91% of our fuel through the maritime domain, and we don't hold the standard 90 days of the IAE dictates that countries like Australia should hold. Depending on the day, we hold 40 or something, but that's different types of fuel. I mean, if our aviation fuel was impacted, for example, we probably only have a couple of days. So, look, if this goes long-term and there is long-term disruption into the Persian Gulf, then we may well see a long-term impact on Australia's fuel security. But I'm not calling that yet. I think that the Strait of Hormuz will not stay like it is right now for weeks or months. There is a huge imperative to get that strait open. And the Iranian Navy has already been basically destroyed, which really limits their ability. Of course, they have an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy with asymmetric capabilities, but that would be harder for them to do. But I think more broadly, this just shows that Australians need to think about how the world has changed. Countries are using military force to achieve their foreign policy objectives. And Australia really does need to think about what the prospect of conflict in this region could mean for this country. And this is just another reminder.
Jennifer, does there need to be more defence spending then in the budget?
There definitely needs to be more defence spending, although some people say, ask a veteran, they'll always say yes. The reason I say there needs to be more defence spending, though, the government has increased defence spending. They did do that in 2024. It's going to get to about 2.3% in 10 years' time, or just under. It's about 2.05% now. The reason we need to increase it, though, is any military planner that looks at the Australian Defence Force's capabilities can see significant gaps. one of those significant gaps is our own ability to shoot down missiles and drones. We have a very limited ability to do it, and we wouldn't be able to do it for a prolonged period of time. Now, Australia is not like Bahrain or Israel or the UAE. You can't defend the entire continent of Australia against drones or missiles, but you do need the ability to defend critical bases, critical infrastructure, and critical government infrastructure. And I don't really think that we have that ability extensively right now. So that is one of the reasons that, yes, we need to increase defence spending. There are a whole other range of reasons. We have limited satellite capability. Our Navy, despite the announced investment, still needs significant growth. One of the concerns about the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, for example, is that the IRGCN might mine it. Well, during World War II, Australia saw significant mines around us. We spent years after World War II cleaning them up. We have limited ability right now in our Navy to detect and clean up mines. So that's just a couple of examples of the capabilities we lack and why we do need to increase defence spending.
Jennifer, always great to chat with you. Jennifer Parker, Adjunct Fellow at ANU's National Security College. We have more on Australia Ahead. That's every Tuesday at 11:40am if you're watching in Sydney, 8:40am in Hong Kong. You can also tune into the Bloomberg Australia podcast, delving into the biggest stories shaping the country's role in global business. You can find that on Apple, Spotify or Bloomberg.com. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets? We are seeing modest gains across European equity markets.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
The top corporate stories we're tracking. Bloomberg has learned that U.S. officials are considering caps on the number of AI accelerators NVIDIA can export to any Chinese company. The proposed cap would limit Chinese firms to buying 75,000 of NVIDIA's H200 chips each, with shipments of some AMD chips also counting towards the cap. The limit is less than half of what firms, including Alibaba, privately told NVIDIA they would like to purchase. Japan's PayPay and an arm of SoftBank Group seeking to raise as much as $1.1 billion in the digital payment firm's U.S. IPO. This would be the biggest ever listing for a Japanese company's unit on a U.S. stock exchange. At the top of the price range, PayPay would have a market value of more than $13 billion. The Toyota Group has reached a deal with Elliott Investment Management to privatize Toyota Industries at a price of 20,600 yen per share. The new offer values the company at 6.7 trillion yen. Bloomberg data shows that if the deal is completed, it would be the biggest acquisition ever of a Japanese company. Heidi?
Take a look at Japan Tech. As you mentioned, this is a space that we're watching very closely with that news when it comes to NVIDIA. US capping or considering capping NVIDIA H200 sales at 75,000 per Chinese buyer. We'll also have that investment of $4 billion in data center optics companies there as well. That is a space that we're watching all to the upside, some by the tune of about 12%. That is it for the Asia trade. Our markets coverage continues to the start of trading in Hong Kong, Shanghai and Shenzhen.